Our next speaker is Roberto Trujillo. He, let me get the correct title here because it's so illustrious. From Stanford University. He is the Associate University Librarian and Director of Special Collections, Francis and Charles Field Curator of Special Collections. He is here to share his experience with Peter and also discuss what the process is and what it means to have an archive and be an archivist.
Thank you all for being here. Now, I'm pretty soft-spoken, so if I need to speak up, say something.
Shout out.
Speak up. I have to tell you that I had to go to a speech therapist for a whole semester in college because I was training to be a teacher and I was speaking way too fast. And my therapist asked, "Why do you speak so fast?" And I said, "Well, I have so much to say." And they said, "But Roberto, if you're speaking 300 words a minute, nobody's going to get it." And I thought, okay, you got me. So I had this whole semester of therapy to learn to speak more slowly and to enunciate. So hopefully that'll come in handy today. My talk is about Peter Koch as a printer and an artist, and how I came to meet him and how he has influenced me. And I think I've influenced him to some degree as well. And I think if you think about it, you'll note that Peter has influenced Aaron considerably, and I think that Aaron has influenced Peter considerably. And when you hear Russell talk, you'll see the same thing, that influence and influencing. And I think that's pretty spectacular when you have that mix of people and minds coming together. I met Peter about 25 years ago at Stanford when I had first become head of special collections. He introduced himself through, I'm not sure if it was a phone call or an email, but he came to show me a couple of artist books that he had collaborated on and he did the printing for. He was not the poet or the artist who did the illustration work, but he was this collaborative person. And I said, "I've never bought an artist book, and I'm not quite sure what you want me to buy. So you're going to have to be a salesman and educate me, but I'm perfectly happy to listen to you and to learn from you. And I know that you're a printer because you had done a number of commissions for annual reports for the Stanford libraries, and most of them were done letterpress. So that was a special feature for us. Anyway, I met Peter. I ended up buying, he had two editions of the same book. One was in English and one was in Spanish. The poet was a Mexican, the artist was a Mexican, and an edition was in Spanish. And I bought the Spanish edition, of course. And then Peter said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, we're in California, and like, you know, I should buy that one first. I probably want the other one as well, but I can't afford both this fiscal year. So I'll buy the Spanish edition now, and I'll buy the English edition when I get my new pot of money." So that's what I did, and that's how we met. And then Peter invited me to have a drink on 4th Street in Berkeley, a few blocks down from his studio. And that was the start of many drinks over 25 years. But I learned so much from him in those after work sessions. And it was about him being a master printer and an artist, and me not knowing a whole lot about either one of those things per se. My interest at Stanford was primarily in collecting manuscript collections and archives. And so jumping from that to a single object was a big deal. And then I realized that Peter was really obsessed with the letter form. And I thought, how could somebody be obsessed about picking which font and which letter form? You know, like, how can that be? But you then realize that it's a big deal to pick very deliberately the letter form that you're going to use to make a word. And then you learn that Peter is obsessed with the word. And then he's obsessed with the line. Then he's obsessed with the geography of the word on the page. And the paper becomes important. And so you have a guy who's fussing about the letter, the word, the geography of the page, the paper, the ink, the binding, the package. And then you realize that all of these things are part of the message. And then an epiphany happens and you realize this guy's an artist. He's not just a craftsman, he's not just an artisan. He's mixed all of these things and he's turned it into an art form. And I thought, how can that be? And then I realized and knew that he was from Montana. And like, how did Montana produce this? And I'm not dissing Montana because I grew up in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and in northern New Mexico. So we're both kind of Western country bumpkins. And how did the two of us end up being at Stanford doing what we do there? And at Stanford, I and Stanford Libraries have collaborated with Peter for 25 years on publishing and on exhibitions and on catalogs. Peter's archive is at Stanford. All of his published work is at Stanford. The catalogs that are in the little bookstore right next door here, the Material Lumina and the Book Art Object and Peter's catalog Raisonné are all co-published with Stanford. So his influence on me, and I think my influence on him to let us at Stanford be part of this so that the rest of the world can know what it is to be a printer artist. And it's this collaboration that is really, really fundamental. And then, you know, Peter and Susan, his wife Susan Filter, started talking about, you know, Roberto, we have to have people like you from other libraries do what you're doing. And so Codex was kind of born. And so they had many more discussions about Codex without me, but many discussions about Codex with me. And I was always of the opinion that Codex should be a place for people like me to learn about people like Peter, and for that to happen in a social setting where we can have a margarita or a martini or a glass of wine, and where other people who are creators can gather in a marketplace so that people like me who collect for institutions and people who collect privately for themselves can come together in a rendezvous, Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico kind of way, where you have people intellectually interested in what creators have to say. And you come to realize that these creators are creating things because they have something to say. They're not doing it just for the heck of it. They've actually got something to say, and they want to share it. And what better form to do that than a book, you know? And so over these 25 years, it's gone on and on and on with different projects and different collaborators. And because of Codex, as Aaron mentioned, it's a marketplace where people from all over the world come and meet people like me who buy and build collections for research and teaching, and people who collect for their own pleasure. And then we learn from each other. And that by itself is probably Peter and Susan's best legacy in terms of influencing and then being influenced, because you learn from all of those people who come together teach us. They teach Peter, they teach Susan, they teach Aaron, they teach Russell, they teach me. You know, we come in and we grow together. And we've had, I think, 15 years worth of Codex at this point. How many? 17 years? That's a long time, you know. And it's made a huge difference internationally. Library of Congress comes, Yale comes, Harvard comes, Stanford comes, Berkeley comes, UCLA comes, Penn comes. Pick your university. They send their curators to this marketplace and to this learning venue to learn about the book as an art object. And how do you collect that for your teaching and research program wherever you are in the world? And so that's like, you can't buy that, you know? And that happened because people wanted to share and people wanted to influence. And people were dealing in the end with art. And art, you know, does something to your soul. It's not about business or money, although the marketplace of the fair is that, because the creators do need to make a living. But I don't know that they come to make money. I think they come to share. And they, you know, if they're lucky, are able to sell enough to cover expenses at least. But it's not a marketplace to make money. It's really a marketplace to share. When we were forming the Codex structure, you know, the book fair, the symposia, and then the cocktail parties and the dinners are all part of it. It's a cultural thing, I think, for book art people to want to do business over drink and food. And so that's important. Peter, you know, has kind of been the grand master of all of that. A little bit older than me, and so I had to learn a lot from him to become part of that world and engaged in it. The exhibit that's up at Stanford now is part 2 of the Materia Lumina book catalog, book that's in the bookstore here. It's what we argue are the 75 more important pieces of book art that have been exhibited somehow at any of the Codex book fairs over the last 17 years. And so how do you pick 75 works from 2,000 or 3,000? It's not easy. It takes a lot of martinis, a lot of tequila. And then it takes these discussions of going back and forth. How do we pick? And all of the stuff that has been shown is particularly cool. And so are we judging people somehow in some unfair way? And in the end we argue, no, we're not. We're just, you know, showcasing 75 of the coolest, and there are another 75 that another institution can showcase, and another 75 that another institution can showcase. And so you don't have to have the catalog that we did be the end all of what is worth exhibiting in a catalog like that or in a exhibition program like that. This program was at Stanford. It's up until the end of August, and then in September there's going to be a comparable show at the Boston Athenaeum. And so this idea of sharing book art and the critical reception of that and acknowledging the individuals who do that work is part of the game, you know, and it's for us to live and learn from each other. And so for Peter's catalog raisonné, which Stanford is also a co-publisher of because we did an exhibit of all of his work, was it 4 years ago, 5 years ago? And for that catalog, I was supposed to interview Peter, and so I did, but I was doing a practice run on interviewing him when we were down in Mexico City together. And Peter cornered me at one of the receptions and said, "Roberto, what are you going to do to me? What are you going to ask me?" And I said, "Well, Peter, you have to understand where I'm coming from and what you have taught me over the years, and how do we share that with other people? Because I think, like me, others would want to know." And so I wanted him to explain, without embellishing a history or making it sound greater than it is, why he was obsessed with the letter form, the word, the page, you know, art, why he was obsessed with the book as an art object, and how did he want to share that with the world, even though sharing it with the world is kind of a weird concept because the editions that most book artists produce are small runs, 25 copies, 30 copies, 15 copies. So that means 15 or 20 people or institutions in the whole world can have that work. That's not a lot. But if those institutions, you know, are libraries like mine, where you have a constant turnover of students every year, it guarantees, in my opinion, a continued critical reception. And so Aaron's reception of Peter's work and Russell's reception of Peter's work is theirs now. But what are Russell's and Aaron's students going to say about Peter's work 2 generations down from them? That's going to be quite interesting. Are they going to have a similar response to Peter's work or Russell's work or Aaron's work? They're all printers and creators. I'm the only one that does not do that. I just collect it. And so I wanted to not just talk about that, because we're lucky to have the exhibit at this museum, you know, across the hall, and you get to see some of this work that Peter has produced over the last 45 or so years. And you'll have gotten to hear from Aaron and Russell about his influence on them. And I thought, well, since Peter is here, and they're here, and I'm here, and the works are here, maybe we should hear a little bit from Peter as well. And so I wanted to repeat some of the questions that I asked him in Mexico some years ago and see if the responses are the same.
See if I've changed my mind.
See if he has backtrack on anything. And the first question that I asked him, you know, was, Peter, you are fascinated with the letter form, the word, the text, and the codex, and your fascination has led you to transform the way in which these elements communicate with each other through the materiality of the printed object. For you, working with paper, ink, design, and printing is not just high craft, it's art. Your study of the history of printing and the book, and your willingness to exploit new technologies for making of the book, mark you in a singular way as an artist, and perhaps more concerned with the art form than you have ever been. And the question was, why?
Aaron, I need your help.
And then the follow-up question to that was, why is it important for you to create as you do? And I actually really wanted to know that, you know. I really wanted to know that. And so I think Peter, his response was several pages long, but can you respond to that question that was asked so many years ago? But I think you constantly think about it. And if you paid attention to to Aaron's talk earlier this afternoon, he's paid attention to it. So there's something to this guy that we should pay attention to, because he has a lot to share. And I think it's not just something that he's trying to sell, he's trying to share it. And it has turned into an art form of sharing, and an art form that is his books. So Peter, speak up.
Well, you know, Aaron was talking about the more or less metaphysical and I mean, some of the philosophical issues that he felt that I dealt with is, and if you ask, I think anyone who, well, I'm not going to act probably. I am deeply challenged by having an idea and trying to figure out whether I can make something out of it. I mean, I mean, deeply challenged. I mean, it's like, if I don't do this, I don't think I'm going to enjoy the rest of my life. You know, I think I'm going to be a failure, you know, and I'm going to be, you know, and I'm going to be worse off. And so, but because I've had this idea that I wouldn't call it brilliant, let's just say that it became enough of an idea that it's like floating down a river and you don't know how to swim, and this log shows up floating next to you, and you just like grab it, you know, just you don't think about it, you just grab it because it's an idea. And in the sea of chaos, where you know how our minds work so almost against us sometimes, you know, you say, oh, how am I going to get out of this depression? You know, well, let's see, I better let's see, maybe I should go gardening, or maybe I should you know, maybe I should call my son, or maybe I should walk the dog. You know, for me, the challenge when I was young, and I was 30 years, 35 years old, was, you know, to get to do something that that was a revealing of who I am. And I wanted to reveal who I am, or was at the time, because I thought it was such a good idea that I had. Once that, especially at the point where I developed it. And I'll give you an example, real quick example. As a student, I was fascinated by the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus, of which we have about 200 little short fragments. The longest one's a sentence, and most of the fragments are less than a sentence. And I was fascinated by it because of all the emptiness that it left to think about. So, you know, I would read this fragment and I would go, God, this leads me places. Hey, this guy makes me think. And I was obsessed with it for a while, and, you know, liked it. And then one day I had a dream, and I woke up. I mean, I had this dream in which I'm in a library in the Middle East, in sandstone, and it's probably, you know, 2,000 years ago. And I go into the library and I say, you know, bring me Heraclitus, because, you know, he'd written a big book, but the book didn't survive, just these little shards and fragments, 200 half sentences. He said, bring me with Heraclitus. I'm in my dream, you know. And this monkish sort of person, you know, because we're probably in the Library of Alexandria or something. He goes into the darkness and he comes out with a book and he lays it out in front of me. And I saw it in my dream, and I did not forget it. What it was is it was a book that was made of broken up leaves of papyrus, handwritten in Greek with black ink on leaves of papyrus, but the leaves had been bound along one edge, and then it was smashed between two boards. And it was about this tall, and it was about this wide, and it was about this thick. And bam, and I opened it up. Shit, I woke up. I was going to get, you know, I mean, it's like, oh, you know, I mean, Moses was a lot luckier than I was. You know, he had the dream and God spoke to him. Right? You know, I opened the book and I woke right up. But I then realized that I had an idea for a book that maybe never existed, but I could make it exist. So then I got the Greek type made. I didn't in this case. I mean, I had the Greek type cast by a foundry in remote New Hampshire, the only foundry in the world that I could find that had this one Greek typeface that I wanted. And then I had another foundry in Marin County in California print the English on the other side of the page, the Greek here, English here. And then I had some paper hand painted, and I found a paper that I liked, and pretty soon I had the book. But of course, it was only 200 fragments. Instead of being this thick like the real book was in my dream, it was only this thick. It was a tiny little thing, 200 lines times 4, you know, roughly. But that turned out to be a big hit. People really liked that book. And one of my best friends at the time, well, still a very good friend, but, you know, one of my better friends who could read Greek and all of that, he told me that he thought that was, you know, like a really incredible book. And I had to agree with him because I thought it was incredible because it was a retrieved dream object.
Yeah. Another question that I asked Peter, and I think he's been speaking to this question already, but I tell him that his work is a cultural production that must become part of the cultural record. And do you consciously recognize this as a responsibility? And for me, it's a question for me, because as a director of a special collections library at a major research university, which has the job of collecting the cultural record, what responsibility do I have to collecting this dude's stuff? And if he didn't create things that were worth or merited collecting, where would we be? But I clearly felt that his work is part of our cultural record today. And so because of what I do in my research library setting, I have a responsibility to collect it. But the real question is, I think you sense a personal responsibility to create that cultural record. He's nodding yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, that I mean, just to be flippant about it, I played right into his hand, right? I mean, there's a guy collecting stuff, for future scholars to read. I said, oh, okay, I'll make some of that. No, I was acutely conscious growing up as a child. I mean, growing up here in Missoula, acutely conscious of history, family history, and archives and special collections, because my great-grandfather's letters are held. He wrote them, in 1860, and from Fort Musselshell in Montana to his family, his cousins and his uncle in Louisiana, and they were recent immigrants from Denmark. And all of these letters ended up, instead of being dumped, this 600 or more letters, they went into the archives and special collections at Louisiana State University, Baton Rouge, because there was one of my ancestors' daughters never married and outlived absolutely everybody, and she became like 100 years old. And what am I going to do with all these old letters? Because no one ever threw them out, and she wasn't about to throw them out, so they went to the university. And a scholar that I wouldn't know during World War II couldn't do his scholarship where he wanted to because of the war. And so he was stuck in Louisiana, and he needed a project, because being a scholar, he needed original material to work with. And so he went to the library and said, what do you guys got? I'm stuck here probably for 4 years. What am I going to do? What's the material I can work with? He said, well, we have this Koch collection of letters. That they were just letters. They hadn't been transcribed or anything. He started reading them, and he became fascinated. He became so fascinated that he published article after article in historical journals, little bits and pieces and shards of my great-grandfather's letters back home. But he even got so obsessed that he wrote a novel about my great-grandfather that was never published. And I found that novel simply because I knew he had written these articles, and I was interested in my family history, and I was interested in archives because I prowled through them all my life, I seems like, because I was a university hog and I couldn't get enough, and I lived in the library and worked in the library. And I called the university where he had retired from. They said, well, hey, he's still alive. You want to talk to him? And I called him up, and he answered, hello. I said, my name is Peter Koch. He said, oh, are you related to, And I mean, he was 90-some years old. And he said, oh, I wrote a novel about your great-grandfather. It's in my papers at the library. I gave him to the library. He's kind of old and doddering like me and he just said, if you want it, I'll give it to you. So I said, oh, cool. So I've been playing into that cultural record because my great-grandfather did. And also, I could tell you similar tales about my grandfather and my father, and also my great-great-great-great-great-great, all the way back, because we were a very literate family. We came from the priesthood, more or less, in Denmark. And that meant you had to go to university and study philosophy and theology and or anything that you could study. You had to be a doctor, but to get to the high position in the church, and they all were there. And I always thought that I needed to measure up, Roberto. I thought I needed to measure up to my goal, and my goal was to be worthy of my own family.
You did.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. This next question is a loaded question, especially for all of you people who are from Montana. And I stated that part of your aesthetic is what you've termed cowboy surrealism, maverick poetry, and frontier philosophy. But those notions beg to exclude the evidence that is the history of printing and the book over centuries that your work reflects and is informed by. The Montana influence is certainly a hook for differentiating you from other master book printers, and there is certainly a there. But how does the influence of your Montana sensibility weigh on your world of fine press printing and design. And I was actually curious, this whole Montana aesthetic that is part of Peter's, and then he deals with Greek typeface. And, you know, he has been influenced by old masters. And he's taking that influence and giving it a cowboy twist, a cowboy surrealism, maverick poetry, and he did it. And we're all here enjoying it. But I was always fascinated, how did this crazy guy get away with doing this? And it's not crazy. Over 25 years, I've come to realize what that is. But I think other people would want to know of a response from him, because he's a world-class master printer and book artist, but he's from Montana. And he has Montana in everything that he does. As Aaron stated earlier, there's Montana in all of this work. And to me, that's fascinating. So, cowboy surrealism, maverick poetry, frontier philosophy.
Well, you know, I was very much, couldn't wait to get out of Missoula. I didn't need to leave it behind me forever. I just needed to get out and see the world. And I was very fortunate in that I came into a little bit of money when I was 21 years old, enough to send me on a 9-month binge in Europe and North Africa. And that's what I did. And in that process of going there and always, who do I hang out with anyway? Strangers, weirdos, artists, writers, poets, painters. That's the people that seem to, you know, we all seem to like meet each other. I mean, if I could be sitting in a cafe at the Café de Paris in downtown Tangiers. I mean, I'm sitting there all by myself, you know, there's nobody around, you know, that I would know, nobody. And, you know, I open up a conversation with the guy next to me. Oh, that's William. My name is William Eastlake, and I've written these 5 novels. And I said, oh, that's interesting. You know, my grandfather once wrote a novel, you know, and then next thing you know, we're chatting away. You know, this kind of thing would happen to me over and over and over again. I mean, and I always felt that the humor of people who may not be from the West, but who are looking at the West, it's a kind of, it opens doors for me, you know, because I want to know how other people see me. I know how I see the world, right? It's easy. You figure it out yourself. You just look out and you say, oh, you know, that's, Norman MacLean said, the farther you get from Missoula, the higher the incidence of bastards, right? You know, that's a childhood thing, right? You know, 2 guys talking to each other, brothers and sisters, and you know, they've decided that anybody from Butte's a piece of junk. You know, in Great Falls, you got to be kidding. You know, in Hamilton, they're, you know, Hokies. You know, we're from Missoula. You know, but I grew up thinking, you know, that there was, every kid in the world was just like me, and so, you know, Russell would have the same experience from his household outside of New York City. Aaron and I became, you know, bestest friends because we clearly had exactly the same experience in Montana, but plus we had the same philosophy professors, and yet, you know, we reach out and we find our way through the, you know, through the labyrinths of chance and circumstance, and we find our friendships. And I found my friendships amongst people who are interested in things like Greek philosophy and surrealism. Oh man. I mean, just today I saw my second excrescence of surrealism in Montana, which is at the Ursuline, because the gargoyles that sit on top of the tower of the Ursuline is actual, you know, sort of like dream sculpture in a way. Of course, it came from the Gothic and all that, but I had seen on Last Chance Gulch as a kid the Atlas Block building that has the salamanders around the Onion Dome. And I would look up at that as a kid and go, that is so cool. And I was rebelling at being a rebellious child. I rebelled all the time against whatever it was that someone was trying to feed me. So I had the worst school record, dropped out of everything, got F's in half my classes and A's in the other half. If I liked the teacher, I got an A. If I didn't like the teacher, anything about that teacher I didn't like, I got an F. And I carried that on to the point, to such a crazy extent that pretty soon I would run out of things to do in Missoula. I just burned it up as far as I was concerned. And I'm moving to New York or Paris or London or San Francisco, and I did it over and over and over again. For 30 years I just moved back and forth. Well, not 30, 20, but I always came home to Montana because fight as hard as I could, the balsam arises, the larkspur, the lupin, the cutthroat trout, the eagles, the smell of the ponderosa, the smell of the cottonwoods when the creek is flooding. Those things are just, they make me the most happy thing in the world. To go walking on Rattlesnake Creek in the flood stage, and fight my way through the willows, and smell every flower. And so when I got a little, I'm going to keep you. I got to stop.
Okay. And we're almost out of time for my session, but I'm going to give you one little factoid about Peter. From 1986 to 2006, Peter taught at the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley a class titled The Handmade Book in its Historical Context. And I frequently get asked by students, because of today's technology, what is the future of the book? And I have a colleague at Stanford who teaches a class on the history of the book, and her line is, the history of the book is the future of the book. And I really believe that. And after having interacted with Peter for 25 some years, it just reinforces that all the time. And he's making books all the time. And that is, I think, the future of the book. And that's not to deny digital copies of things or digital access to things, but it's not going to replace the book, I don't think. So anyway, we may have a couple minutes for a question or two, do we? Do you have questions, especially for him?
I have one for you.
Yeah, for me. Uh-oh.
You said the first time you met him, you bought the Spanish book.
Yeah.
Did you ever buy the other one?
I did.
Okay.
I did. Peter was really happy that I bought both. But the thing was, this was an example of a collaboration between Peter as a printer, a Mexican artist who did the illustration work, and then a poet who was also, and they were based in San Francisco and Berkeley, and they produced these incredible books. And what was the edition? Do you remember what the edition of that thing was?
Probably about 30.
20, 30? And
15 of each.
And so they're all gone. So 30 institutions or 30 people in the whole world have that, and that's it. I think that's cool.
I'm going to make a comment about that.
Okay.
Smallness of edition, because I'm constantly get comments from people who are hostile to the idea of a book costing thousands of dollars, and it's brand new. It's not $24, and it's not $17. And I'm constantly badgered by people who don't like that idea. They really don't. And they come to me and they say things like, I won't even tell you what they say, because some of it is so bad. And the only thing I could say is that, look, I'm just doing this the best way I can. And I can only make 30 of these before I drop dead with exhaustion. And it took me 10 years to make this book. And I only got 30 copies. But they're just the way I want them. And if you can't afford it, can you afford a Van Gogh? No. But you can go to Amsterdam and look at a Van Gogh. Van Gogh. You got a Charlie Russell in your dining room? No. But you can come to Great Falls and see one. So, this is my only excuse, not excuse, but defense, is to say, well, I'll find out where the copy nearest you is that's in a public collection, and I'll send you the address and the name of the person who's the curator, and you can go visit it.
That's really cool. I once juxtaposed a book, an artist book that I bought for $15 next to a book that I bought from a very famous sculptor, Manuel Neri, which was $95,000. They were in the same case, in the same library. And okay, students, talk about it. react to it. I mean, like, it doesn't have to be a multi-$1,000 volume for you to learn something from. It can be something that's $15, $10.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the book is the book, you know. But the book has to have a message, and the person who wrote the book or made the book is the messenger, and this is the medium. And so my favorite book of Peter's, and I say this because I'm looking at the Sacagawea book, which was a collaboration with you and Deborah, who's here, who's Montanan. And when I first heard about him working on that book, I said, well, where did you guys find this manuscript? And he said, well, there isn't one. I said, well, then what are you doing calling this the Journal of Sacagawea? And so you then learn about the collaboration between the printer and an artist and a poet, and how do you give a message even without a manuscript, you know, by studying and knowing a culture. And that that's still one of my absolute favorite books.
Oh.
So cool. Anyway, I think I'm done. So,
Thanks.
Aaron has a question. Aaron, you had a question or a comment?
Well, first a comment. I want to say Lost Journals of Sacagawea is also one of my favorite books. And the closest copy that I'm aware of is at the Librarian in Missoula. If you want to go see the real thing, other than right over here.
That's right. There's only one. There is a copy in Missoula at the public library. Oh, that's true. And there's another copy in Dillon, Montana. Is it the Western Montana College? Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Roger Dunsmore.
There's one right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one in the exhibit.
It's the one from the university. It's here on loan.
Cool. You had a comment?
I have a question following something Roberto talked about, different kinds of books. And I forget where you said this, but somewhere, Peter, you talked about how some books are like suckers that you catch and you throw them back. But not all books are the same. I mean, that's one thing I think you got to remember is John, I call them airplane fiction, when you buy a book at the airport to read and then you just leave it somewhere for somebody else. Yeah. It's a different kind of book than what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You had a comment or a question?
Allowed, I mean, you can look at them, to read them, to touch them.
At Stanford?
Yes.
Oh, of course.
So precious.
They're precious, but they were made to be touched, to be read, to be smelled.
Because the feel of the paper.
Absolutely. And so, yes, in any research library, they're there to be studied, read, touched.
You can go to
And
this
a
Roberto's
freshman-
library and they'll bring you the book
A
and put it down in
freshman
front of
doing
you.
a little 10-page paper has as much access to that book as somebody working on their dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most libraries who have copies would treat them the same way. They're there to be had, you know. And in case you haven't noticed, Peter loves what he does, and I love what I do. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
And just so everybody understands, based on the conversation that was had, is that the works that Peter has in the archives at the University in Missoula, all of them are currently here at the Square on exhibit. So if you want to see his true works in real life form, they're here at the Square. And that's the important part of this lecture series, is the exhibition of Peter's work, so that we can see it, we can live it, and we can listen to the words.
And you can access it, yes.
And you can access it. And I had a question about, is there a chance for us to see it by appointment? Yes, by appointment. If you contact me, we can look at it individually.